afternoon for the people that is joining us from Colombia. Thank you for being here today to join us in this amazing panel of connectivity, education, and innovation in times of the COVID-19 pandemic as part of our annual Colombian Symposium that this year is titled Transitioning to the New Normal, the Path to Recovery for Colombia. Thanks to Dr. Carlos Lugo, Dr. Vicky Colbert, and Dr. Álvaro Garbis for being here today, for accepting our invitation to join the discussion. And last but not least, thank you to Dr. Ellen Helsper for being the chair today. Ellen Helsper is professor of digital inequalities in the Department of Media and Communications at LSE, where she also serves as the program director of the Master of Science in Media and Communication. She has a PhD from the Department of Media and Communication at the LSE, and also a Master of Science in Media Psychology from Utrecht University in the Netherlands. Professor Helsper also holds a visiting scholar at the USC Annenberg School for Communications and Journalism at the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, and the Regional Center for Studies on the Development of the Information Society in Brazil. Thank you again, everybody, and Dr. Helsper, on to you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me to chair this event. I'm really looking forward to what this interesting lineup of speakers has to say this evening. Just as a reminder, I think in terms of housekeeping, if you have any questions for the speakers during the event, please put them in the Q&A, and we'll try to collect the questions and find time to answer them at the end. As a way of starting this evening, I would like to introduce the speakers. We will first hear from Carlos Lugo, and Carlos Lugo is the Commissioner of the Communications Regulation Commission of Colombia, and he's the former executive director of the same institute organization of the government. He's also professor at the universities of La Sabana and Externado de Colombia. He has a PhD in social studies of science and technology and a master's degree in the same subject. He's also a lawyer with a specialization in telecommunications law. And Carlos has led multiple programs and projects in the field of ICT, education, science, technology, and innovation. He has been seen as innovation coordinator, head of the Office for Educational Innovation in the Ministry of Education. He's been the director of ICT appropriation of the ICT Ministry, and has been a member of the boards of directors in different entities, and the president of the Superior Council of 2 universities. He is also the author of the book Los Técnicos de la Innovación, and co-author of the book La Innovación Educativa en Colombia, among other publications. So we'll hear from Carlos first, but before we hear from Carlos, let me introduce the other 2 speakers who will follow after he has done his presentation. The other 2 speakers for this evening are Vicky Colbert, and Vicky Colbert is the founder and director of Fundación Escuela Nueva. She is laureate of the first edition of the Gidan Prize for Education Development, won that in 2017, I believe, and has also won the 2013 Wise Prize for the Education Laureate. Colbert is a sociologist from Javeriana University in Colombia, pursued her graduate studies in sociology of education at Stanford University in the United States. In 2015, the American University of Nigeria distinguished her with an honoris causa doctorate in philosophy. She's the co-author of the world-renowned Escuela Nueva model and was its first national coordinator. Colbert has pioneered, expanded, and sustained this educational innovation for many organizational spheres. As Vice Minister of Education of Colombia, UNICEF's education advisor for LAC, and now from the Fundación Escuela Nueva, an NGO that she has founded to ensure its quality, sustainability, and innovation. She's been recognized with several awards and distinctions in the fields of leadership and social entrepreneurship, such as the Skoll Award for Social Entrepreneurship, the Clinton Global Citizenship Award, and the Kravis Prize. She has also been recognized as Outstanding Social Entrepreneur by the Schwab Foundation, Oshoka, and the World Technology Network. And then the last speaker of the evening, but of course not the least, Alvaro Galvis. And Alvaro and Galvis Panqueva is a full professor at Uniandes at the Faculty of Engineering, where I believe he entered in 1995, if the information that I have is correct. And he is a senior advisor of educational innovation supported by ICT at the Center for Innovation in Technology and Education, Conectate Uniandes, sorry. He is a systems and computer science engineer from Uniandes with a master's and doctorate degrees in adult education with the support of digital technologies from the Pennsylvania State University in the United States of America. So as you can see, we have a very distinguished lineup of speakers, and I will stop talking and give the word to this lineup of speakers. I'm very much looking forward to what you have to say about this extremely important topic, which I've spent much of my career researching and hope to continue to be involved in projects around the world. Thank you very much. Carlos, please go ahead. Carlos, it seems that while we were able to hear you before, I have a slight problem hearing you. Let's see if we can.
Is it okay? It's okay, my presentation?
No, it's fine. Yeah, we can see your presentation. We can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon. It is an honor for me to be able to share with the London School of Economics community today. Today, I want to share my point of view of some challenge that the COVID-19 pandemic and the accelerated digitization process have had in Colombian society and in the world in general. The first things I want to reflect on is the transformation that society has had in three important elements: work, commerce, and education. As you can see, oh my God, sorry. Oh, sorry. It was in the last slide, sorry. And now it's okay. As you can see in the presentation, according to a study carried out by the Deloitte firm, the new work trend is teleworking or virtual work, with an increase in Latin American countries of 324% during the pandemic. In commerce, the increase in e-commerce has been significant, transforming all interactions between users and companies, consumers and companies. The increase for Latin America is more than 157%. And finally, you can see in the slide, in online education, the increase is located at 62%, to which must be added the increase in streaming services. With this data, it is necessary to conclude that the future of commerce, work, and education has no return. The main reason, as I will present later, is because all industries, and therefore the professions linked to those industries, will require a curricular change in terms of worker skills, and their virtual education will have challenge not only in terms of didactics, but to the specific digital skills for each profession or each discipline. For example, ICT for law, ICT for business, ICT for medicine. Another important factor, perhaps the most important one for public policies and for ICT regulation, is the connectivity. None of above is possible without internet connectivity and broadband internet connectivity. 2020 was a year in which Colombia began its process of definitive closing of the connectivity gap, which will culminate according to our forecasts in 2025. In 2019, radioelectric spectrum was assigned to companies that achieve greater connectivity. The process is advancing, but it's not easy in Colombia by the geography and costs of rural connectivity. However, we went from 52% in 2019 to 60% in 2020 during the pandemic. As we can see in the presentation, that we have now 34 billions of connections to internet in Colombia. That is improving. The COVID-19 pandemic forced us to generate flexible regulation to achieve greater connectivity, make more flexible conditions in the protection of users, in the quality of service, in the regulatory obligation of companies in general. For example, in Colombia, in the CRC, or Communication Regulation Commission, we create a regulatory sandbox program to allow companies to make regulation more flexible and also deregulate to achieve more connectivity coverage. And in this moment, several initiatives are being debated in the Congress that seek to make internet access a fundamental right. And I must say that in Colombia, it is already a public service, but it is on the way to being an essential public service, or internet as a fundamental right. I believe that the next 5 years in Colombia and in many Latin American countries with connectivity problems, we will achieve universal coverage with mobile connectivity. The date is 2025, according all the studies. And also from 2021, we will begin to see the deployment of infrastructure for 5G in the world, which is another issue. In this slide, you can see how the deployment of the connectivity infrastructure will be in the coming years in the world. And in Colombia, it will be similar. From the Communication Regulation Commission, we made the same analysis, and therefore we can conclude that by 2025, more than 80% of mobile internet connection will be in 4G, 80% of population, which will improve access to other services and rights using technologies, one of them, education. With this context, I want to propose 4 challenges and my conclusion about the challenge of connectivity, and especially of education in the era of hyperconnectivity and the post-pandemic era. My first challenge is the curricular update focused on the transformation of industries and professions or disciplines. In a study on the digital economy that we developed at the Communication Regulation Commission in Colombia, we conclude that today all industry have the potential to transform digitally. And that is how they have been digitizing step by step. The music industry with applications, the audiovisual industry with OTT platforms, the postal sector with the e-commerce, manufacturing, commerce, etc. That is why when we are faced with emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, data analytics, mobile applications, etc., it is important that each profession or each discipline develops a specific digital skills to guarantee its future. This is the responsibility of the universities and the curricula they teach. All sectors, is my conclusions, of the economy are transforming. The second challenge that I present is for governments, for ministries and secretariats of education. And it is regulatory flexibility so that universities can adapt not only in their physical versus digital infrastructure, but also in the curriculum, in the teaching and learning methodologies. Some institutions are doing it. Some private applications are developing new forms of education. For example, MOOCs platforms, free courses applications, and new educational strategies such as Singularity University, focus on solving real problems of the world and society with ICT. That is why another message for the future of education after the COVID-19 pandemic is to focus on solving problem curricula. This is the third challenge that I present, to identify which are the main challenges and problems of today's society. For that, new standards of education for students must be incorporated, where technology is not just learning Microsoft Office package, nor is it even just teaching programming. Standards are required for students to use technology in problem solving, on solving problems. Teachers to develop analytical skills too, For example, that allow them to work with data and personalize learning in the future. There is another issue in that question. Also, focus on the development of a true digital citizenship. For example, in my previous job in the Ministry of ICT or ICT Ministry in Colombia, I had the opportunity to transform with my team the digital appropriation program in the ministry, using a theoretical framework, the 9 elements of digital citizenship of Mike Rebo. And you can see in the slide that the citizens need to understand and to develop their digital citizenship skills about digital commerce, digital communication, digital rights and responsibility, digital health and wellness, etc. Today, we need citizens to develop these elements or these digital citizen skills, but we must develop from primary school, not only in the secondary school or not only at the universities. You need to develop that kind of skills or from the primary schools. Finally, those of us who also exercise the teaching profession and those of us in management positions in educational policies, it is up to us to understand the new profile of our students who is gradually becoming a digital user. This also applies to education. For this reason, in a study that we developed in the Communication Regulation Commission in Colombia, we identify a new digital profile where young people are considered heavy users, intensive users of mobile technologies which must be complemented in a hybrid way with face-to-face or training in person. And with that study, I want to finish with my recommendations or with my principal conclusions. First, in terms of discipline, educational innovation process must involve and focus on transforming the curricula of professions and disciplines and specific digital skills. Remember, digital skills for lawyers, digital skills for business administrators, digital skills for doctors, etc., etc., etc. And in the pedagogical, teachers must understand the current generations of students and use tools and formats that are easy to adopt, intuitive, social networks, video formats, use of data, different softwares, different educational software. And in emerging technologies, as part of the research, and in innovation projects, use it as a strategy for experimentation and simulation according to each profession or according to each disciplines. That applies to the vocational training too. We must re-identify the higher purpose of society, the problems and challenge of the world. For this, technologies must be the instrument to train leaders of change in real context, which today includes the technology or the ICT, the information communications technologies. Our challenge as a government is to guarantee access to the internet as a human right. For that reason, we need to continue with the public policies for universal coverage, better regulation to promote investment and competition in the internet markets. That is my job in the Communication Regulation Commission. Develop new regulations, innovation in regulation to improve the connectivity. Institutionally, greater flexibility is required. And I'm talking not about the ICT policy, I'm talking about educational policy. We need greater flexibility. It's required for universities in order to experiment in offering programs and methodologies and compete with the native digital companies from. We cannot lose the sense of education and solve problems and solve the question of humanity today in the process of digitization. And my last conclusion is that remember, in all cases, that men should control the technology, not oppose it. And I want to answer the question that I received and Ellen sent before, because I have to go after my presentation. And I want to read the question, or the final question. And let's say, which specific inequalities in education that have become apparent during the pandemic are you most concerned about? And in follow-up, what would be the most effective ways of tackling this? Who and what should be involved? That's the question from Helen, and I want to answer that question. In large part, my presentation summarized my views on this question, but let me list some of this inequality and a conclusion about that. First, internet access is an inequality. Internet access, especially in rural areas, which will be resolved with greater public investment, with the contribution not only of the central government, but also in countries like Colombia, of each of the regions that also have responsibility to improve the deployment of infrastructure. Of course, also in compliance with the obligations that internet providers have assumed with the government today from the allocations of radio spectrum for mobile technologies. Second, the high regulatory burden that universities have versus another type of non-formal education that is gaining ground. Educational applications, 100% virtual education, among others. For that, we require spaces for regulatory flexibility in education and controlled deregulation. For example, with experimentation methodologies such as regulatory sandboxes. Finally, access to other technological tools, both hardware and educational software, data analytics tools in education, not only teleconferencing platforms, but digital laboratories, simulators, etc. That's my point of view, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Carlos. I don't know if you have time to answer, there was one question from the audience, the people who are attending as well. If you have 1 or 2 minutes, it would be great if you could answer that question. Yeah. There was a question about how do you find the balance between the need for digital skills and the new curriculums, while also addressing the lack of access to technology in developing countries. And I assume we're talking in this case about Colombia in particular. So how do you do digital skills in situations where access is still also a major issue?
Okay, I believe that we must continue to improve, improving development, new strategies to develop with in the different institutions those kind of skills. I tell you, and I presented in my presentation. I believe that we have a big challenge. The first challenge is to build a new digital citizenship. That's the first. And in Colombia, for example, from the Ministry of Education and from the Ministry of the ICT Ministry, we are working to build that kind of digital skills for citizens. But the second step is the development of digital curricula, but for a specific purpose. In primary school, in secondary school, ICT for research, ICT for innovation and technological development projects. And I believe that we have to work harder because other countries or the first world have better strategies maybe. And finally, in universities at the higher education, we need to develop from the Ministry of Education in new regulations or in more flexible regulation, because now we have a lot of companies, private companies that are not institutions or official institutions in the country, developing different courses or developing different training for citizens that I believe that that is the job, or that is the task for the universities. So that's I believe that we have a lot of challenge in the country to I don't know, to broke with the inequalities in the policy, and to broke the inequalities in the digital skills for all the Colombian people.
Thank you. Yeah, so take the skills to the people rather than waiting for the access to get to them. Yeah, so thank you very much. We know that you have another important appointment now in which you are going to try and implement all of this.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have to present my final report as executive director of the ERC. And thank you.
So good luck with that. Thank you so much for making the time. So we'll go next to Vicky Colbert. Vicky, if you would like to turn on your video as well, that would be great, so that everybody can see you as you are doing your presentation. That would be fantastic. Welcome, Vicky. I'm going to give you the word, and what we will do now is we'll have Vicky present, and Alvaro present, and then we will have questions afterwards. So we'll have the two presentations together. Okay, go ahead, Vicky.
Okay, thank you very much, Helen. Well, Escuela Nueva, which it means new school in Spanish, is not so new anymore. It's one of the longest bottom-up innovations of the developing world that's still being sustained. It has inspired many educational reforms worldwide, reaching more than 7 million children, mainly through the governments. But where did we start? Colombia, like the rest of Latin America, many years ago, did not guarantee complete basic primary education, because in the rural areas where there's no connectivity, that's where we work, no connectivity, there were many of these invisible multi-grade schools because of our geography, these very isolated, invisible schools where there's one or two teachers that have to work simultaneously with all the grades. Well, necessity is the mother of innovation. We were forced to innovate. And as Angela Little, former director of the Institute of Education of the University of London, says, well, these schools require much more innovation. So it's a little bit the story of Cinderella, Escuela Nueva, because we started with these, the poorest or the most remote schools. But since nothing worked, we had to rethink everything, change the learning paradigm. Go from transmission of knowledge to social construction of knowledge, is changing the whole essence of the learning paradigm, which is nothing new in the philosophy of education. I mean, we were inspired in Montessori, in John Dewey, in Vygotsky, the great pedagogues at the beginning of the century. But these ideas came to the elite schools in Latin America, not to the poorest of the poor. So we were inspired in all these ideas, and that's when we started Escuela Nueva, basically to ensure the right to basic primary education. So the first thing we had to do was change this learning paradigm. And I will share with you and think systemically from the outside. If we wanted a new type of citizen, a new type of child, we needed to change the way of working with the teachers and a new role of the teacher, a new way of involving the parents in the learning process, a new way of involving the community in the learning process. So I will share right now, Juan Sebastian will put some images just so you can see what I'm talking about. Just children in the rural areas. But we had to modularize the curriculum to facilitate personalized learning. I hope he puts it on. There we go. There we go. Now we hope to have some, just so you can have an idea. So it was putting good quality education for the most vulnerable children of Colombia. And no, not yet. He doesn't show the images. So, well, yeah, let me try again. Yeah. No images yet. Here we go again. This is, I'll show the images later on, then I'll just talk to you and share. So what did we have to do? The first thing we had to do was change the learning paradigm and have child-centered, active, participatory learning. Not all children learn the same thing at the same time, so you have a bit of personalized learning. We had to modularize the curriculum. We wanted to have a little bit of the Montessori type of learning environments in classrooms. So with low quality, low income and low cost materials, we had rich learning corners. And we also we wanted to ensure that children could have their school governments and, they have school governance. So they run and participate. Precisely yesterday, I was participating in a WISE conference showing how we nurture leadership from the beginning. And in these schools, we don't have connectivity. But what do we work? Children work with learning guides. Learning guides are like a hybrid between a workbook, a textbook, and the guide of the teacher. But they don't only have content, but they have pedagogical sequence. And I think this is the most important part. So I want to mention at the end what we did with the COVID situation. So there have been behind, so it's cooperative learning. Children learn through dialogue and interaction. The role of the teacher is a new role as a mentor, a facilitator, somebody that is permanently facilitating and giving feedback during the learning process. So it started as a local innovation. It became a national policy at the end of the 80s. We reached more than 25,000 schools once the World Bank selected it as one of the 3 innovations worldwide that had impacted national policies. Many countries came into Colombia. Many of the international organizations supported its dissemination in many other Latin American countries. I just want to highlight one country, not in Latin America, that already implemented the Colombian model, Vietnam. Vietnam already implemented Escuela Nueva in its entire population with a wonderful impact evaluation from the World Bank. So what has happened? Nothing new, as I said, in the philosophy of education. We have had decades of research behind Escuela Nueva. UNESCO in the year 2000, in its first Latin American comparative study, wrote to us and said, Colombia and Cuba are the only countries where rural schools outperform urban schools, compensating for socioeconomic inequality. This is crucial because it's the issue not only of quality, but of equity. And of course, many research and evaluations have been behind, especially the one published by the University of London, not only on learning achievement, but on the impact of peaceful democratic behavior of children. And considering that Colombia was the first democracy in Latin America, well, this is important for us to highlight. So in relation to this, there have been decades of research. I had to create, once it became a national policy and it started expanding throughout Colombia, simultaneously with the decentralization process, we said innovations are very vulnerable to political and administrative changes. So we had to create a Fundación Escuela Nueva, it's a Colombian NGO, to continue innovating and to ensure its quality. So we have adapted it to urban areas. We adapted it to urban areas, calling it Escuela Activa Urbana. Now came the photos. Now came the images. We can just go over them very fast. So we transformed the conventional way of learning from frontal teacher-centered instruction, nothing new, as I said, child-centered active cooperative learning. What does it promote? Child-centered participatory cooperative learning, flexible promotion. Not everybody learns the same thing at the same time, different learning space. A new role of the teacher as a facilitator, a mentor, somebody that has more time to know how their children learn and has more time to get feedback during the process, formative evaluation. How we bring the parents to participate in the learning process in the community, that anything the child learns can be applied to the community. Effective teacher training methodologies, because universities are too academic. Not even the word multigrade is well known in any faculty of education in Colombia. We're very theoretical, a little bit far away from the reality of the rural areas. How we nurture democracy, John Dewey since the beginning, and school government working with children. And as I said, a new generation of self-paced, self-directed, reusable learning guides that incorporate both content and methodology. So these are to facilitate flexibility, and children are dialoguing all their time, individual work and cooperative learning. Children construct knowledge, relevance and contextualize knowledge to their learning environment, learning corners, and everything, elements that can bring the community into the school. And it generates a new culture of peace and citizenship. And as I mentioned, there has been decades of research behind. Now, what happened with the COVID situation? Since we don't have connectivity in the rural areas, well, the teachers themselves decided to go get their learning guides, which have content and pedagogical sequence, and children are working with them at their homes. And the teachers are calling them through the telephones, through the mobiles, through WhatsApp groups. So they've been facilitating all this, and and children continue learning, which is the most important part of all. Learning hasn't stopped. So however, the teachers, we also, we train teachers with the same methodology that they will be using with their students. So we have something called the micro centers, which teachers in far remote areas, they used to get together and share what they were learning. Teachers learn more from other teachers than from experts. So it was a teacher to teacher strategy. But for them, since many of them live in the small towns, they do have connectivity. So what did we do? We had the micro center, we had Renueva, which is a renewal, which is nuestra red, but we created a virtual campus called campus.escuelanueva.co. What has happened? We are now training teachers virtually. We just finished training 1,000 teachers of the most remote areas of Colombia virtually through our virtual campus Renueva. Unfortunately, it's still in Spanish. Hopefully in the future, we'll have it in English. But so we have the combination of the two, the printed learning materials for children, and sometimes the teachers look for their local radio stations to ensure and to complement. But the most important part is that our virtual campus was enriched with the teachers' participation. And we just recently, as I mentioned, we just trained 1,000 teachers virtually, and we will be training 2,000 teachers in a couple of weeks. So this is what we had to do. We had to rethink everything, but the essence of Escuela Nueva has been maintained, and I guess this is the most important thing. So my takeaways after so many years working with Escuela Nueva, it is possible to improve the quality of education and learning. Yes, it is possible, even in the most deprived areas. More of the same is not enough. We have to have this paradigm shift from teacher-centered to really child-centered education, nothing new. A very systemic approach from the outset. You have to think systemically. We have been measuring self-esteem. Learning should go beyond academic achievement. We've been fostering social emotional skills, and we've been measuring self-esteem of children since many years ago, especially now the 21st century skills, learning to learn, learning to lead process, learning to take initiatives, but most important, learning to work in teams. We have learned technology triggers change, but a new pedagogy is indispensable for effective learning. I like to quote my friend from Uruguay, Luis Osin. He used to say many years ago, just introducing computers in the classroom without changing your pedagogy will perpetuate at a higher cost of traditional technique. And you do see many computers, full of dust in all the rural isolated schools. But another thing that we have learned, to reach impact, you have to work with governments. But for quality and sustainability, you need public-private partnerships. If we had not created Fundación Escuela Nueva, everybody would have said, oh, that nice program that was a national policy years ago is already finished. So we have learned you have to have public-private alliances for quality and sustainability. And with this, I will leave some space for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Vicky. Well, I'll make some notes for some questions that were asked by the people who are attending the event. But first, I would like to go on to Alvaro so that he can do his presentation, and maybe we can collect some questions, then you can both address them at the end of the talk. So Alvaro Galvez, if you would like to I can see your camera, and maybe Vicky, I think you have to stop sharing your screen. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah,
there we go. Yep, that's already changed. Okay, thank you very, very much. And Alvaro, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It is a privilege to be here. I work at University of Los Andes, and really I am very involved in educational innovations. And with the pandemic, we have realized that the pace of change has changed a lot. It is now like a need. And in trying to solve this challenge, we have tried to solve different challenges that I'm going to share with you. Basically, what is the context for this could be represented by this. It is like learning to fly a plane while the plane is in the air. Basically, you have to learn, unlearn, relearn, and also you have to reconsider so many variables, but you cannot fail. You have to keep the experience, And that is what happened with many teachers and with many students and with many parents when a year ago we had to stop going to face-to-face education and start using basically non-face-to-face education. The problem is that not many people were ready for this. Basically, what they were used was to work face-to-face. There were some people doing distributed learning, and there were a few doing like blended learning. And the problem is that when in a week you have to change, you have to realize that you don't have time to be trained. You have time to build on the best of your knowledge and then start building new initiatives. So the first challenge is really to rethink the space and time for learning. And I am mentioning there that the problem is that hybrid learning is more, more than face-to-face plus virtual learning environments. And basically it has like two elements. One is there is like a continuum from traditional face-to-face to completely online learning. And in that continuum, you have to the left, everything is synchronous and you have to move the full group at the same pace and there is no time for attending to differences. On the other side, you have completely online, absolutely no face-to-face components, and you have the possibility of doing synchronous or asynchronous, and you can use different type of resources. Of course, in the face-to-face, also you can use many resources, but most of the time, the resource is the teacher or the teacher and the book, or those learning centers that Vicky was talking about, where students can go and play with different things. But in the mean, you have like the possibility of technology enhanced without reduction of face-to-face contact time. And basically, what you start is using technology, digital means to enhance the possibility of interactivity or active learning, not only transmission. And then you can move to blended, and blended, it is like technology enhanced, but with reduction of contact time, or move forward, and you have mostly online supplemental or optional face-to-face contact. The point is that this doesn't recognize something that happens in any of these, and it is that it is not only face-to-face, meaning a aula de clase, or virtual, meaning aula virtual, but there is also self-paced, autonomous work. Even if you are dealing with traditional approach, you have to recognize that it is not only what happens while you are interacting with the students. Students have homeworks, students do field studies, students watch events, play things. And if you plan only the traditional face-to-face or the opposite, the completely online, you are like missing a very important part of the component. So when I say that a hybrid learning is more than face-to-face plus virtual learning, is because there is this self-paced, and that is very important when you are thinking in terms of work study and academic workload for the students. The problem is that with this clarification, you are only focused like on those components that are very functional. But both Carlos and Vicky were mentioning that we are having a challenge in terms of quality. in quality is not really tied to any of these three learning environments. Quality goes beyond this and requires a embedded pedagogy. And pedagogy brings like this second challenge, which is moving from passive to more active learning. Charles Graham says that when you start using technology, you can use it for, let's say, addressing issues of access and convenience. For instance, you can distribute materials using the LMS, or you can use the learning space for collecting homeworks and sharing documents and things like that. But you are just keeping the way you teach. You are just, instead of sending students to the photocopier, you send them to a class, a virtual class space, and then there they get what you have prepared for them. And on the contrary, when they have produced something, they do not bring it to you, but they share on the web. When you start thinking in terms of incremental changes to pedagogy, considering that students should learn through social interaction, through exploratory avenues, through reflection about what is in their context, as well as on any other way of achieving to knowledge, then you start enhancing lengths. And that is something good. It starts making a difference, but it is not transforming the way you teach and you learn. The third level is when you give control to the students. You give them really the opportunity to build knowledge, to interact with other students, and to learn also from the interaction with passive methods blended with non-passive methods. So this is a second challenge, moving from passive to more active learning. And in doing this challenge, you start realizing that media is very important. And when you start infusing media, then you realize that blended learning can be reconsidered in terms, not only in terms of space and time, but also in terms of multiple dimensions that apparently some of them are opposite, such as formal and informal experience, learning, face-to-face and online experiences, directed paths and reliance on self-direction, digital and references and collegial connections, and everything in order to achieve individual organizational goals. So you are like having the opportunity to blend not only spaces, but means, but ways of arriving to knowledge, a type of participation, synchronous and asynchronous, different types of approaches and means for arriving to knowledge. And of course, this can be reorganized, and we can talk about a fourth challenge, and it is moving towards transformative, multidimensional hybrid learning environments. What is the transformative part? It is the pedagogy that Graham was talking about, and the multidimensional has to do with all these dimensions that I am trying to present in this diagram. The first three were like the essence of the first challenge, and we were talking about blending using spaces, times, and the frameworks where to learn, but also in the second, we were talking about pedagogy, which can be conventional or not so conventional. But pedagogy without means is very hard, and we have to realize that active means allow students to experiment and learn by means of what happens if, that the expository or transmissive means allows authors to convey the ideas that they have already built, but interactive allow people to exchange and genuinely interchange ideas and build together by means of social interaction. And of course, this allows for formal, non-formal, and informal learning experiences. And depending on which of these are you using, the focus of control is the teacher, the student, or the stakeholders. And basically, this brings us to the initial point. If you are in the case of learning to teach remotely or coming back to a new normal, then you have to realize that, as in the case of learning to fly, you have to keep a positive attitude, believe in yourself. You can unlearn, relearn, and adapt and grow. But also, you are able to combine different educational approach. You can use an algorithmic approach, like fly as I fly. So I give you a, like telling what is next, what should you should look at, and with this, you will learn to fly the way I teach you. But also, I can give you freedom. I can trust in the way you approach problems. You use means, you make links, and then what we are doing as teachers is helping you develop your own learning style. And this is what I got while reflecting on the invitation that I got concerning challenges in terms of virtual learning environments, which is like the original title of this presentation. I will be pleased to solve questions and participate with you in this interaction.
Thank you very, very much, Alvaro. That's all fascinating. Vicky's as well, of course, two very fascinating and complementary, I think, presentations. I'm going to do a very, very short summary of kind of the ideas of that kind of arose in my own head when I was listening to you talk, but I will keep it extremely short because I think we should give the floor to the questions also that come from the audience. It's very fascinating to see also a little bit the contrast between the first presentation that we had by Carlos Lugo and yours, which have slightly different emphases on kind of more on the pedagogy and how we engage with technologies versus the accessing of the technology itself. And what I found fascinating both your presentation is that I can see the same shift in your thinking. That is a shift that has been taking place in pedagogical kind of academic work, but also in pedagogy in practice, from this idea of transmission of information and learning functional skills to this idea that we need, that learning is actually a collaborative social enterprise, and that therefore we also need to acquire kind of skills that are more critical, social, and understanding of what the world is made of to be able to not just function in it, but to participate in it. And it's really interesting, and what we see in our work is that we've got this global project called the From Digital Skills to Tangible Outcomes project, where if we want to look at the outcomes that people can achieve through using technologies, it's exactly those kind of more critical kind of participatory skills in the digital spaces that allow people to achieve a range of outcomes. Well, if we talk about what Alvaro was saying, like, fly as I fly is important. You need to be able to fly the machine, but then to be able to get where you want to get, you need to have a creativity and to develop a better machine, let's say, or to make a better world with that machine to fly to the right places, let's say you need to have your own understanding of the world and how it works and the machine that you're using. And so I find that very fascinating. And I hope that people will take that away, that of course there's no use of technology in pedagogy without access, but that's not the end point, right? That then we need to think about learning. So I have, as a chair, the privilege of asking a few questions, and there were 2 questions that we've prepared, so I will ask you to respond to those first before we get to some of the questions from the audience. And then, because there have been a few questions popping up, and I want to make sure that we definitely get to those. The 2 questions that kind of were posed both by the Colombian Society and me as we were thinking about these events were really about, and thinking specifically about Colombia, you know, what is the balance for the country overall, this overall performance in terms of, you know, kind of accessibility, innovation, and educational quality after a year of the pandemic? You know, do we need to rethink the measures implemented, or are we on the right track in Colombia with the measures that's already been taken, of course, in the context of education? You've both talked a lot about that we need to rethink and we need to do things that are new, which is maybe not new in the pedagogic sphere, but maybe in this digital world that we're living in, we need to rethink. So I'm going to ask you to respond to that question. And then the follow-up question from myself was, because that's, you know, where I'm interested in, is which specific inequalities in education that have become apparent during the pandemic are you most concerned about? And yeah, what would be the most effective ways to tackle these? Who should be involved? So those are the 2 questions. How is Colombia doing? And do you need to rethink the measures, or are we on the right track? And which inequalities have emerged, and who should be involved in trying to tackle these? And then hope you can give a brief answer so that we have enough time for the questions that are arising from the audience. So Alvaro and Vicky, up to you. Who wants to go first? But please distribute.
Ladies first.
Yeah, okay. Oh, you need to unmute, I think, Vicky, before we can hear you. There we go. Yeah.
Alvaro, I think you have a wider view of the whole situation of connectivity in Colombia. I'm in the middle of the rural areas where there's no connectivity, so I can talk about what we're doing, you know, how the challenges became opportunities. But I think you have the idea of, comparatively speaking, of Colombia with the other countries in the LAC region. So, gentlemen first.
Okay.
Yes, I
Go
am very
ahead,
pleased.
Alvaro.
I am very pleased with this first question, because I have a direct experience in rural areas. I am living in rural area. I work from here, and I deal with all kind of challenges. But the most interesting thing is how the peasants that live near me deal with this challenge of the pandemic. First, I think that this has raised a lot of social conscience in terms of you have to avoid so many things, but you have to practice so many other things if you want to keep healthy. And that is beyond what you are learning. That is social behavior. But the other thing is that the kids need to keep learning, and they need to keep working. So I was wondering how they are doing if they do not have some days electricity, if they do not have some days access to technology or things like that. And I have realized that, as Vicky says, challenges bring opportunities. For instance, WhatsApp has become like a very, very critical means of learning. Not because the teachers teach using WhatsApp, but because, for instance, in the neighborhood where I live, there is a motorcycle that goes across each one of the houses where students study. And on Monday, they distribute the documents that they have to use for learning. And there are multi-grade schools for primary schools. And the students start doing things, but they keep connecting with their teacher by means of WhatsApp. And I was wondering, how is that? Yeah, WhatsApp works even in these old-fashioned mobiles. And the teacher keeps really near the students. There is like a couple of children that lives like 2 blocks from me. And I asked them, what do you do to interact with your teacher? And what they do is they WhatsApp these people or ask her when she's coming. And then I went and talked one day with the teacher, and she said, I cannot be very near to anybody because I am one of these at-risk persons. So I need to keep at home and I need to use media. So it is very interesting to realize that by means of technology, they are overcoming problems that usually you just will not be considering. Because on the one hand, the mayor of this small town pays for the motorcycle to go across and for the photocopies. And the teacher collects all those things, review all those works, and give them feedback by means of technology. So it is like a good example of the kind of things that could happen if people are open-minded, they are creative, and so on, so on. But you can look at the other side. For instance, I work for the University of Los Andes, and faculty really had similar problems depending on where they were at the beginning of the pandemic. There were some very good, innovative faculty that were ready for teaching online, blended, hybrid, whatever. But there were some that never had used technology for teaching. So we have to support this faculty in moving forward. And after a semester, I see a semester, no, almost a year, I see like there are significant challenges in terms of culture, in terms of trusting, because there were many parents that were asking, why do we pay so expensive tuitions if we are just being exposed to not the best things of University of Los Andes, but they realize that the best things are the people. So the labs, now we are using virtual labs, we are using a bunch of things that remediate the lack of physical resources. But with that, it is possible to solve part of the challenge. But trust is important. No parents have realized that the kids can study alone, that they can do networking using technology, not only play games and things that were like the standards between quotes, and that teachers not only teach by means of giving talks, that they can create handouts, that they can interact synchronously or asynchronously. And school administrators have realized that setting up all the learning environments, face-to-face, virtual, and home, is as important as keeping the old normal thing. So I will say that the pandemic has taught us a bunch of things, and depending on where you are and what are your problems, you could find the ways of solving the problems or the challenges that you have.
Thank you, Alvaro. That's a very positive picture, I have to say. And I think I will push Vicky a bit on what still needs to be done. We've heard a lot about innovation and all these great interventions that are happening in Colombia and also elsewhere. So let me ask you a little bit more of a question about what still needs to be done, and what are there any things that worry you that you've seen in terms of, you know, who is able to access these programs or who's able to participate? Where is the work that still needs to be done in Colombia from your experience?
Yes, from our experience, since where we work, we don't have connectivity. It would be wonderful to have connectivity. It would be wonderful. I think the country has to make a big effort in reaching the rural areas, because independently that we look for solutions, it would make a big difference. And as Carlos mentioned at the beginning, it's a right. I think we have to have much more connectivity in the rural areas. But despite this limitation, the COVID situation really forced us to get to the essential aspect of learning. I saw it more as an opportunity, because immediately, it forced us to really be child-centered. We're talking about this for almost 40 years, and it really forced us to be really child-centered. It really forced the teacher to change their role. And this was crucial, because now it's almost like a social worker. The teacher has to be worried, calling her children to know how they are, if they're depressed, if they're, to avoid dropouts. So the teachers are really assuming a new role as mentors and orientators, and they need more information about the families. So here are all the things we had in Escuela Nueva, like the self-paced learning guides that supports autonomous learning. Now the teachers are seeing this is a wonderful idea, and here they're giving their learning guides, not making them, giving the printed learning guides to the children, because they promote, it's a modularized curriculum, and it facilitates the children learn at different learning rhythms. So here the teacher, is really assuming and promoting this with the printed learning guides. It would be great in the future to have other complementary things. But in the case of the teachers, and by the way, the parents, so it was really child-centered. It forced us to be child-centered. It forced us to change the role of the teacher. It forced us to bring the parents. In Escuela Nueva, always parents have to participate in what children are learning. And children always have to apply what they're learning in their school, in their families, and in their communities. So, we were forced to do what we were promoting for so many years. Now, in the case of the teachers, for us, it was new, totally new situation. Our very, let's say, weak micro centers, the teachers learning circles, they became stronger, because now the teachers are coming into Renueva, into our virtual campus. And this has, rural teachers are a little bit shy to be trained virtually, but we just had the experience of training 1,000. And in 2 months, we will be training 2,000 teachers virtually. And we've had very little dropouts. So I think it's something that has been a very positive opportunity. So I'm a very optimist person. And I see that this has opened the road to many changes. And, all the examples that Alvaro was giving in a very organized and systematized way, I would love to see that afterwards, because we're going through it. We're really going through it. And so I'm not so negative. I think of course, we need connectivity in the rural areas, but children have continued to work because they have their learning materials.
Yeah,
and the role of the
connection with the
the real role of the teacher. And now we have our big macro centro, where teachers, we have Escuela Nueva en Casa, so they're learning how to, come to the children, and the teachers are now getting much stronger with the use of technology. And, so we had very little dropouts in the recent training we had. So I have seen that, education, learning is an activity, it's not a place, okay? So I think it's really opening the doors for more things. And I think to the bottom line is I see very positively what has been happening.
Okay, great. Thank you, Vicky. There was another question that was put up by somebody in the audience and kind of follows up on these questions that we were just asking. Which was about the role of the CRC, and obviously we now can talk about it with Carlos being here. It would be, but I think the question was also posed to both of you. What do you think the CRC kind of can do in order to facilitate or promote not just the kind of connectivity, but perhaps connecting young students and teachers to kind of the digital, further to the digital world that we're increasingly living in. Is there anything that the CRC, from your point of view, could particularly do? What is the role? You talked about public-private partnerships Vicky, but I don't know if Alvaro has something to add to that. So what do you think the role of, let's say, government is in this whole issue?
I would say that this is a universal problem because we cannot wait for the government to build everything. We cannot wait for parents to do everything at home, but all of us have to join efforts and build partnerships in order to really overcome weaknesses and to overcome those problems that are like substantial. I really, I get sick when I watch news, and the only thing that they show is all the bad things that happen because of the COVID, the delays vaccinating people, the problems with ancients, but they do not realize that there are many, many, many good experiences that are not of interest for the communicators. That is a shame. And I will say that if all of us were trying to add value, not just to talk about things that everybody know that it cannot be solved in one day, but if each of us is committed to participate and solve the problem, I can be sure that we can move forward every day.
I totally agree with what Alvaro is saying. Totally agree with him.
Collective responsibility, right? Everybody has a role to play, and kind of learn from good practice and from positive examples. Yeah. Okay. So I've grouped a few questions, and please, people in the audience, if you do have more questions, do put them in the Q&A. We'll keep an eye on this. There was a question for Vicky and a question for Alvaro. I'll group the two because maybe you can think of both about an answer to this question. So the question for Vicky was really was from an anonymous attendee, I'm afraid, so I can't tell you who it was, but is your focus really in terms of the educational program that you're programs that you're involved in to compete on kind of traditional grounds for the kinds of jobs like the city jobs or this kind of, or is it more focused on practical skills, and how can you kind of increase the kind of the quality of education to make rural and public schools more competitive against these kind of private schools that and this is clearly, people know the context of Colombia, who always ace the kind of say for 11 tests, the Senate 11 tests, so like what is the function of the programs? And then for Alvaro, there's something that is kind of slightly related to that, because it's about what are we teaching people for in these digital and virtual spaces. And it's the question that came from Mario, who asked question B, how to introduce this kind of emotional intelligence in teaching with blended or virtual systems of education, and teaching leadership and patience and controlling emotions in the presence of other people. So these kinds of soft skills, right? So what are we educating people for, and how do you see that? How can we use these blended or virtual learning systems to do that? Or in Vicky's case, it's on that spectrum between face-to-face and offline, and some aspects of education are face-to-face offline. So please go ahead. Maybe Vicky, you can start, and then we'll go to Alvaro to follow up.
Well, we work a lot with, our focus is basic education from 1 to 9, from grade 1 to 9. And more I'm going more down, more towards early child. But our focus is on basic education, and we follow the national curriculum like everybody else does in each country. And we have to take into acknowledgement that in Latin America, 50% of students in 4th grade do not understand what they read. So really, we have to, even there has been a great improvement in access, we still need a lot in quality. So this is why this is for us is the crucial aspect, to demonstrate results in quality, in results in learning achievements, but not only in learning achievements, but also in, let's say, the social emotional skills. And this is why the balance that Escuela Nueva has between the formal curriculum and the school and the student governance and so many other ways of learning in Escuela Nueva, they complement these, let's say, the core basic curriculum of the country. However, we have emphasized, because in Escuela Nueva, there's a lot of cooperative learning, and children learn through dialogue and interaction, constructing knowledge together. But we've also played a lot of emphasis on the 21st century skills, what a computer cannot do. Learning to learn, learning to take initiatives, learning to lead processes. I have a good chart with all the 21st century skills, which are the basis for leadership and for empowerment. So learning to learn, learning to lead process, learning to follow instructions, lead to meet deadlines, learn to think critically, learn to synthesize ideas, but most important, learning to work in teams. And this is what robots cannot do. So I think these are the 21st century skills that we have to focus on, and to make sure that we embed these and incorporate them into the curriculums of the national curriculums worldwide. Curriculums are very similar all over the place. But the way you teach is what changes. And here's where I identify myself with what Alvaro was saying, in a more higher level education. But we have to change the way of learning. And I with this, I like to sort of summarize. If I always compare the education sector with the health sector. If I bring a doctor from 100 years ago, and this is not my quote, I learned it from somebody. If I bring a doctor from 100 years ago into a hospital today, that doctor is totally lost. Everything has changed. But if you bring a teacher from 100 years ago, even from an elite school, and bring the teacher into a classroom today, even in a developed country, teachers are not so lost, because everything has changed except the way of learning. So for us, the challenge is good active participatory learning, where you change this learning paradigm from transmission of knowledge to really student-centered. And this is exactly what Alvaro was saying in another context of higher education. So I just wanted to respond to this. And of course, we have to tackle the national curriculum, but the way we teach it and the way children learn is a different way. So in this way, there's much more a meaningful type of learning, aprendizaje contextualizado, meaningful learning. This is what is important. And that's why it has had such good results.
Yeah. No, and definitely, I think this is a pedagogy that's taking ground in, as you were saying, in many parts of the world. It's it's something that people have started realizing. Alvaro, so I think the question was like underlying the question that was asked to you as well is like, is it harder or is it easier to, or what does it mean to be teaching these kinds of skills that Vicky was also just talking about in these blended or virtual systems? People sometimes get the impression that technology doesn't really allow us to teach those kinds of things. So from your experience and kind of what you've researched, how would you say, how can we use these virtual environments to teach emotional intelligence and leadership and collaboration?
I will say that if we go to this idea of transformative education, it will bring us to like the essence of this challenge, because it is not the technology, it is not like the affordances that bring technology, but it is the way you use technology. So really, it is not the modality, it is not face-to-face or virtual or blended, it is the mode. So if the mode is really focused on the student, if you are promoting active learning, then you can be aware that thinking the future, if you are really clear in terms of not education as similar to schooling, but education as learning across the life, learning forever, then the competences that you need to develop are significantly different, because those competences will require like different approach for planning, for evaluating, for assessing, for teaching, and different means. And with this in mind, you will appreciate, for instance, the focus of competence-based, of the focus of active learning, the focus of collaborative learning, because all these are powerful ideas that will allow you to solve those problems that are very near the focus on content, the focus on the means, and you need to go beyond.
Thank you very much. It sounds like lifelong learning and learning ecologies is this kind of, embedded learning, and these are this kind of terminology that we keep hearing come back in this discussion. So I'm afraid we are almost at the end of this session, and there's two more questions from the people who've been attending the event that I will put to you, and they were asked to both of you. And they're basically both questions that go back to some of the traditional things about learning and education that we might see a revival of or think about what their role is currently. And the first question was from Mario Arrieta, who is a school teacher, and he was asking, do you consider that the COVID-19 pandemic has opened the door to the return to radio programs, educational programs, like the ones promoted by Radio Sutensa, which I don't know and then the other question is rather than the kind of traditional radio mediated education platform, the other question was about the role of families. What is the role of families in the learning process in the periods of the pandemic, and with the actual levels of unemployment and social needs and poverty that exist? So how can we engage both our traditional media and the kind of family which has been part of our lives for a very long time? So if you could both kind of try to see if you can answer those questions and wrap up your thoughts about if there's anything that you'd like to add for the event today, then I think that will be how we close off this wonderful discussion.
Well, in the case of Colombia, Colombia had a very strong radio tradition with Radio Sutensa, precisely for the rural areas. And it inspired all Latin America to the use of the radio. And, this was many years ago. But now many local mayors are incorporating the local radio again. And now what I am seeing in the case of the Escuela Nueva teachers is they have the learning guides, which is like a script. It's a planning tool of a classroom. So the learning guide has the intelligent questions directed to the children. So these learning guides are like the scripts for radio scripts. So many of them are using them and using the radio, which is wonderful, which is really wonderful. So many local mayors are combining local radios. And I think this is good. I mean, why not? I myself used to lead a Javeriana University distance education years ago when there was no internet, and we used radio and television. Why not? So you can combine all the different types of media. And the important thing is that your lessons are creative and that they really focus on the learning of the child. And I think this is the important thing. Now, in relation to the parents, sorry about that noise in the background. Somebody's banging next to my house, unfortunately. But with the parents, we always want the parents to participate in the children's learning process, even if they're illiterate. So we have a couple of instruments that give the teachers information, how to gather information about the different families in their communities. And I think this has been very useful because in this way, the La Ficha Familiar, a family card, El Croquis de la Vereda, a little map of to see which child has to walk the farthest away. This in the, when it's, when the schools are open traditionally. But then the teachers have information about the families. And this is important because they know who's the artist, who's the carpenter, who's the singer. So in this way, they can bring the resources, the human resources of the community. And everything the child learns in Escuela Nueva has an application activity with the family and with the community. So this is what really facilitates the learning process. So, it's through very simple things we can have rich learning processes. Now, of course, these things complemented or supported by good blended learning, this would be fantastic for the future.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Vicky, and thank you for all the contributions that you've made so far. So Alvaro, I'll put to you to close the event. I think we heard something about that third space here that is not just the online school and content or the offline face-to-face school and content. So please go ahead and see if you can wrap it up.
Let me build on Vicky's answer, because I think that the idea of using like the scripts as, let's say, ways of building ideas for radio broadcasting is just part of the experience. When I was following Radio Sutatensa and then Radio Santa Maria in Dominican Republic, the most amazing thing that I found there was the learning cycles. People seated around the tree, listening to radio and discussing what somebody was proposing them to watch, see, read, if they were able to read, and then to comment, and based on that, to achieve to new knowledge. And that brings me to the question of what is the role of the families, because that is something that is now happening. Before we were delegating into teachers, into the school, the responsibility of building knowledge. Now, when you are helping your kids, it can be just to turn on the computer and participate, or if you do not have computer, to use the printed guides and start reflecting. Then you realize that both situations are very, very similar, because the reflective component of learning and teaching is what makes the difference, not necessarily the way you convey messages. So you can use radio, use TV, use whatever, but if you do not make that yours, if you do not find why this is relevant, it will not last, it will not be useful, you will not be able to apply that, you will just be letting knowledge go through. And I think that the great challenge that we have as educators is to be able to move people into reflective knowledge, into collaborative activities, into discussions that are genuine, and this interaction among people will make the difference. And I think that in that way, you learn to learn. You are not just appropriating knowledge.
Thank you very, very much. That's a wonderful way to close this event, that even in times of all this innovation and all this technology, that going back to the core principle of engaged learning within the community, within our relationships and our everyday life, meaningful learning, I think also, as it's been called several times, no matter what the technology is or the means that we use, is going to always remain important. And that's something that we should fight for, even if societies become more digital and maybe more individualized in front of a screen. This is something that we should definitely rescue. So I think this is the end of the event. And I would like to really thank the LSE Colombian Society for organizing it. It's been fascinating, and I hope it's stimulated thought in everybody who's attended. And I'll be sure for one to follow up with the speakers and to keep following your work. And I hope that everybody else will also be doing that. So thank you very much. And thank you also on behalf of the LSE and more general to come to this event and to ask such fascinating, engaging questions.
Thank you, Ellen. You have been a wonderful host.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining today, our attendees, our panelists, our chair. We invite you that next week we are hosting 2 more webinars about in the mark of our annual symposium, addressing topics about the peace agreement in Colombia and the fiscal measures that has been implemented to address the pandemic. So we hope to see you again, and thank you, everyone. Stay safe.